So you're undoubtedly familiar with some of these principles, but I think that it would be a good idea to just go over them briefly. And I mean, this isn't not a definitive list, and you may have heard some of these phrased in different ways, but it's always a good idea if you're teaching adults just to keep these in mind, because then you can start to customize the learner experience and how you might modify your teaching approach. So, and these aren't in any particular order. So number one, adult learners are self-directed, as in they've chosen to go on and do further education, and so they want to get something out of it. They're not forced to be there. I mean, in some circumstances that might be linked to other kind of issues, or payments or that sort of thing. But generally, adult learners are self-directed, and so with that in mind, you can start to or you treat them differently. You approach the whole learning process in a different way. They have life experience. That's not surprising, and so how that is significant is that when you're teaching, it doesn't matter if it's a skill or a knowledge based learning outcome or competency, but you can draw on their life experience. They might have a story to tell, they might have some sort of way, they might have spent 25 years in the industry and they're upskilling, they're improving their qualification, and so their life experience can be an important part of what you cover in the class. Whereas with younger learners, they just simply don't have the life experience, so it's more of a challenge to incorporate that aspect. Generally, this is linked. All of these learning principles of adult learning are very much related. It's not like they're these separate little pieces. And so this one, they're motivated to learn, that ties in with the self-directed approach that most adult learners have, where they want to get something out of their learning. They're not there just to kind of fill in the time, and they're motivated to learn. And so with that motivation, that sometimes in other circumstances are difficult to kind of capture and work with. But if you make the assumption that the learners are motivated, you can then write in on that. Adult learners generally seek relevance. So sometimes it's a bit of an old cliche when you are teaching high school students. They say, well, what are we ever going to use this for? Generally, in an adult learning situation, that never occurs, or it shouldn't. It should be quite minimal, because all of the training, all of the learning that they're covering should be relevant, and adult learners will generally seek out that relevance if it's not obvious. This is another good example, practical and results oriented, where it's similar to some of the previous adult learning principles, where a typical adult learner, they want to get something out. They want a qualification, or they want a new skill that they can actually use in the workplace. Maybe their boss has sent them along to do the training. So all of these are just different types of results that often are quite tangible, very practical. It's like assessment. A lot of adult learners will just flick straight to the assessment. They're not interested in the verbiage or the detail, unless it's actually necessary for them to achieve their qualification, and then of course they'll participate. And so there's a kind of very no-nonsense approach generally. This is an interesting one, that adult learners like to be respected. I guess everyone likes to be respected, but if you can get a situation where, if it's appropriate, if you can treat your learner as an equal, sometimes it's not appropriate, but then you can get a lot out of the training. You can really build upon that kind of their motivation and their role within the classroom. So I don't want to go through all the cliches of respect, of it going both ways, and it needs to be earned and all that. They're all true, but I guess it's in terms of what we're why this is on this slide. It's just an important principle because sometimes it goes, it's forgotten. It's kind of people in a training situation, they kind of get into teacher mode type thing, and they forget that it's actually a social process, and where there's any opportunity just for simple respect, then that can go a long way. I'm just glancing down to some of these chat points. Yeah, that definitely some people go straight to the assessment. Beginning her quiz, well, that's a motivated learner, the one that was beginning the quiz during the lesson. I guess it's where the role of the teacher, if it's taking up time. Anyway, I'll get on with the slides. The work-life and study balance is important because you might suspect like a bit of attitude coming from one of your learners, but it may be that they're just trying to remember they've got to get the milk and the bread on the way home, and they've actually got an important meeting tomorrow at work, and they're squeezing in 2 hours or 3 hours of study at night so that it's all compartmentalized, but it is holistically part of their life. And so I guess if that's kept in mind, then it's kind of things like assignments and scheduling, assessments, that sort of thing if you're just mindful of that, it can go a long way. I'm really racing through this. We could spend the whole day on all of these adult learning principles, but I've assumed that you have an basic understanding of all of them anyway. It's just nice to have it as a reminder. This is a really interesting one as well, and I was talking to one of my fellow teachers just yesterday about video editing and software. They said, well, I have been a video editor for a long time. Why do I need to learn this why do I need this accreditation? And I guess that's to me, that signified a bit of a resistance to change. I'm sure that there are new approaches in the software that this particular person didn't know about. However, the point was that he didn't want to participate. He didn't see that it was going to be relevant for him. So that's a bit of a resistance. And as a trainer or a teacher or a facilitator, you have to acknowledge that and work with it. Because that's kind of, that change is a really big concept. In that example, it's change to learning new software, but it could be a whole range of different things, and sometimes the person's not even aware of their resistance to that change. Sometimes adult learning occurs within a framework of kind of like change management, or maybe there's a restructure and people have to retrain, and there's a resentment to embrace the training. And it does definitely go out into very curly territory. But I guess the ship keeps moving, time's still ticking away. And I guess some people are more open to learning new tricks. You can teach an old dog new tricks, I believe. But I guess it's kind of, it's complex, this sort of adult learning, because a lot of adult learners, it ties into the life experience. You don't want to disrespect that life experience, but at the same time, maybe some of your learners have never used social media. Maybe they're being asked to, send out these 5 tweets using Twitter, and they haven't got a clue. They're resistant, maybe they're fearful of using software. There's maybe the workflow with media cards versus tape-based systems, or I don't know, there's a whole range of things. So that's an interesting aspect. You might have experienced a bit of attitude and resistance already. I think I seem to spend a long time on that slide. Now here's my big white screen. So the first bullet point, this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but students who are not used to a learning environment, they may have not been in any kind of training for quite a long time, and then they have this vague notion of a memory from high school, or I never liked my English teacher or something like that. And it sort of brings up sometimes some unproductive baggage. And so I guess it's kind of the trainer's role to basically reassure the learner that the learning environment is positive and purposeful, all these kind of more optimistic aspects. Keep an eye out for that, definitely. Also, there's a phenomenon, students who lack confidence in their ability to learn new things. I find that in some of my learners that are 20 years old, where they sometimes there's a bit of resistance, and it's just because of, they get it's just a fear thing, and it's a psychological hurdle, but there's ways to overcome that. Difficult or domineering students in the class. Now, they're always interesting because I find sometimes people can be painful, learners can be painful, but I guess you can always look for opportunities to get them. I mean, sometimes if you have a domineering student, that's a clue. You could get them to lead some group work or demonstrate some of their life experience. But I mean, it has to be kind of negotiated, and fortunately adult learners are maybe more open to negotiation. And then finally, the technology, it's fairly simple, but it can be overwhelming. And I mean, I guess that signifies our current era in a lot of ways, all this kind of how many clicks were required just to log into this system. But, I guess it's not difficult, but it's, all this stuff happening, and sometimes learners that are a little bit hesitant to use technology, that can put up a very real obstacle that you have to then address. So I might just stop talking and maybe just for a few minutes, and I might like to hear from everyone.